Commander Yule pressed his face against the cold metal of his ship's window, watching the small blue and green planet spinning slowly in the darkness of space. He had seen hundreds of worlds just like this one during his long career with the Galactic Empire's scout fleet. Most of them were boring, filled with creatures that barely knew how to make fire, let alone fight back against the mighty Empire. This planet called Earth looked no different from all the others. The creatures living there seemed weak and slow. Yule's mouth parts clicked together in what his species considered laughter. These humans would be so easy to defeat that it would barely count as a real battle. Lieutenant Nara floated near the control panel, her long tentacles moving quickly across the glowing buttons and screens. She had been studying the planet for weeks now, learning everything about these strange two-legged creatures who walked upright and built their cities out of stone and metal. "Commander," she said, her voice making a wet, bubbling sound through the ship's communication system, "I have finished scanning their technology. These humans have only just learned how to split atoms. They do not even know how to travel faster than light. They have no force fields to protect their cities, and their weapons still use chemical explosives instead of plasma energy." Yule's mandibles clicked even louder now. Every species the Empire had conquered in the past 1,000 years had at least developed basic energy weapons before the Empire found them. These humans were still throwing metal bullets at each other like primitive savages. "Mark this world for future conquest," Yule ordered, already losing interest in the boring little planet. "We will return after we finish capturing the outer star systems. This will be perfect for our new colonists. The humans will either become our slaves or fertilizer for our crops." Far below on the planet's surface, Dr. Park Jinwoo stood in his laboratory in Seoul, South Korea. His eyes were red from staring at computer screens for 3 days straight. The numbers and graphs on his monitors showed something that should have been impossible, but the data did not lie. 3 days ago, every radio telescope and satellite detector on Earth had picked up the same strange readings. Massive energy signatures had appeared at the very edge of their solar system, far beyond where any human-made object had ever traveled. The energy patterns were unlike anything in their scientific databases. For 72 hours, these mysterious signals had remained in the same location, as if something enormous was sitting out there in the cold darkness, watching and studying Earth from a distance. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the signals vanished completely. Dr. Kim Somin burst through the laboratory doors, her face pale with excitement and fear. She had been working with scientists in America, Russia, and Europe comparing their data with what the Korean team had discovered. "Jinwoo," she shouted, waving a thick folder full of printed reports. The Americans at NASA confirmed it. The Russians saw it too. Even the European Space Agency recorded the same readings. Something was out there, something big enough to power an entire city, and it was definitely watching us. Dr. Park looked up from his computer screen, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. Watching us and doing what? Taking pictures? Learning about our military capabilities? "I do not know," Dr. Kim replied, sitting down heavily in a nearby chair. "But whatever it was, it stayed for exactly 3 days and then disappeared. That is not natural. That is not a comet or an asteroid or solar radiation. That was intelligence. That was technology far more advanced than anything we have ever built." Neither. Scientists realized that in those 3 days of observation, the Galactic Empire had learned everything they needed to know about human civilization. They had scanned every military base, counted every nuclear weapon, analyzed every communication satellite, and recorded every radio and television broadcast. The Empire now knew exactly how many humans lived on Earth, what languages they spoke, how their governments worked, and most importantly, how primitive their weapons were compared to Imperial technology. In the Empire's vast database, Earth had been classified as a Level 1 conquest, meaning it would require minimal military force to completely subjugate the entire planet. What the Empire did not know was that they had just made the biggest mistake in their long history of galactic conquest. They had looked at humanity's technology and assumed they understood humanity's true strength. They had seen the metal bullets and chemical explosives and concluded that humans would surrender quickly when faced with superior firepower. But the Empire had never encountered a species like humanity before. They had never fought against creatures who had spent their entire evolutionary history learning how to survive against impossible odds. They had never faced an enemy that grew stronger and more dangerous when cornered and desperate. The Empire was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is not the one with the biggest weapons, but the one with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. 6 months had passed since the mysterious energy readings disappeared from Earth's outer solar system. Life had returned to normal for most people, but governments around the world quietly prepared for something they hoped would never come. Deep space monitoring stations worked around the clock, scanning the darkness for any sign of the unknown visitor's return. On a cold Tuesday morning, every radar station and satellite detector on Earth suddenly lit up like Christmas trees. 200 massive objects had appeared at the edge of the solar system, moving in perfect formation toward Earth. Each ship was larger than any building humans had ever constructed, and together they carried enough destructive power to turn entire continents into smoking craters. Admiral Talon stood on the bridge of his flagship, a massive warship that stretched for miles through the vacuum of space. He had commanded the Empire's 47th subjugation fleet for over 50 years, and this mission looked like it would be one of the easiest of his entire career. His fleet had conquered 300 different worlds, and not one of them had taken more than a few days to completely surrender. The standard Imperial procedure was always the same and always worked perfectly. First, they would send a surrender demand to the primitive species. Then they would demonstrate their superior firepower by destroying something important but not essential. Finally, the terrified natives would immediately give up all resistance and beg for mercy. It had worked every single time for 1,000 years. Captain Lee Minho sat in the International Space Command headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, watching his screens fill with incoming transmission data. The message was being broadcast on every radio frequency simultaneously, and the universal translation software was working overtime to convert the alien language into something humans could understand. "Attention, primitive species of the third planet," the mechanical voice announced through speakers around the world. "This is Admiral Talon of the Galactic Empire's 47th Subjugation Fleet. You will immediately surrender all military assets and prepare your population for Imperial occupation. Any resistance to this demand will result in the complete sterilization of your planet and the extinction of your species." President Kim Ji-young, Earth's newly appointed Global Defense Coordinator, stood behind Captain Lee with her arms crossed and her jaw set in determination. She had been chosen by the United Nations specifically because she had never backed down from a fight in her entire political career. Today would be no different. "Captain," she said calmly, "please transmit our response to the Imperial fleet." "Captain." Lee activated the communication system and spoke clearly into the microphone. "This is Earth Command responding to the Imperial fleet. We acknowledge receipt of your message and understand your position. However, before we can properly consider your surrender demand, we require a demonstration of your claimed military capabilities for scientific analysis and review." On his flagship, Admiral Talon's 4 eyes widened in complete confusion. His translator had to repeat the message 3 times before he believed what he was hearing. In 300 successful conquest campaigns spanning 3 centuries of military service, no species had ever asked for a demonstration of imperial power. Usually they were too busy screaming and begging for mercy to ask questions. "They want us to demonstrate our weapons," Admiral Talon asked his communications officer, still not quite believing it. "Yes, sir. They specifically requested scientific analysis of our military capabilities." Admiral Talon's mandibles clicked together in annoyed confusion. These humans were either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Either way, he would give them exactly what they asked for. "Very well," he replied through the communication system. "Primitive humans observe and understand the futility of resistance against the Galactic Empire." The Admiral's flagship, a dreadnought called Inevitable Victory, powered up its primary pulse cannon. The weapon gathered energy for 30 seconds, creating a bright blue glow that could be seen from Earth even in daylight. Then, with a flash that briefly outshone the sun, the cannon fired a single devastating blast directly at Earth's moon. The moon, which had watched over humanity for millions of years, simply ceased to exist. In less than 2 seconds, it was transformed from a solid celestial body into billions of glowing fragments spreading slowly across space. The destruction was so complete and so sudden that many people on Earth thought they were hallucinating. But instead of the expected panic and immediate surrender, something completely unexpected happened. Within 6 hours of the moon's destruction, every major government on Earth received urgent requests from their scientific communities. Astronomers wanted access to orbital telescope data. Physicists demanded spectral analysis of the weapon discharge. Engineers requested detailed measurements of the energy output and targeting systems. Rather than being terrified into submission, humanity's first response to seeing impossible alien technology was to try to understand how it worked. The Empire had just given Earth's greatest scientific minds their first real look at advanced energy weapons, and they were already working to figure out how to build their own versions. Admiral Talon would soon learn that he had made a critical error in judgment. He had assumed that demonstrating superior firepower would break human morale and force immediate surrender. Instead, he had just provided Earth scientists with invaluable research data and accidentally started the greatest technological advancement in human history. 3 days after the moon's destruction, massive Imperial landing ships began descending through Earth's atmosphere like metal thunderclouds. Each ship was the size of a city block and carried thousands of alien soldiers equipped with energy weapons that could melt through steel like butter. Admiral Talon expected this part of the conquest to be over within hours. The landing ships touched down in major cities around the world: New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow, and Seoul. Their massive doors opened with hydraulic hisses, and Imperial troops marched out in perfect formation, their weapons charged and ready for the usual resistance they encountered on primitive worlds. But something was wrong. The streets were completely empty. General Vex, the Empire's most experienced ground commander, stepped out of his command ship in the middle of Seoul's business district. His 6 legs clicked against the asphalt as he surveyed the abandoned city. In 300 conquest campaigns, he had never seen anything like this. Usually, the primitive species would be running around in panic, screaming and firing their crude weapons in all directions. Instead, Seoul looked like a ghost town. Windows were boarded up. Cars were abandoned in the middle of streets, and not a single living human could be seen anywhere. The silence was so complete that General Vex could hear his own breathing through his helmet's air recycling system. Hidden beneath the city in a network of subway tunnels and underground bunkers, Colonel Kang Hyun watched the alien troops through carefully concealed cameras. He had spent the last 3 days studying every second of footage from the moon's destruction, analyzing the Imperial ships' movement patterns, weapon ranges, and tactical formations. "Listen carefully," Colonel Kang whispered into his communication device, speaking to resistance fighters positioned throughout the city. "These aliens have conquered hundreds of worlds using the same basic strategy. They expect us to panic, run straight at them with our guns blazing, and surrender when we realize our bullets cannot penetrate their armor." He paused, watching as more Imperial troops spread out through the empty streets, growing increasingly confused by the lack of resistance. "But we are not going to give them what they expect. We are going to fight like humans have always fought. Smart, dirty, and with everything we have." The first attack came from the sewers. Imperial soldiers were walking past a storm drain when human fighters emerged silently behind them, using modified construction equipment to disable their energy weapons before they could react. The aliens found themselves facing opponents who fought with tools they had never seen before: crowbars, welding torches, and industrial chemicals. The second wave of attacks came from above. Humans had positioned themselves on rooftops and inside abandoned buildings, using the aliens' own energy weapons against them, after quickly figuring out how to operate the captured equipment. When Imperial reinforcements arrived to help their fallen comrades, they found empty rooftops and no trace of their attackers. General Vex quickly realized this was unlike any battle he had ever fought. These humans did not stand and fight like honorable warriors. They struck quickly from unexpected angles, then disappeared before Imperial forces could respond. Even worse, they were using the city's own infrastructure as weapons. When Imperial troops tried to pursue human fighters into subway tunnels, The humans collapsed the tunnels behind them, trapping entire squads underground. When alien aircraft tried to provide air support, humans used construction cranes and building demolition charges to bring down skyscrapers, creating massive obstacles that grounded the Imperial air fleet. Most disturbing of all, the humans kept fighting even when they were clearly outmatched. General Vex watched in horrified fascination as wounded human soldiers continued attacking with broken bones and bleeding wounds that should have incapacitated them completely. They fought with a desperation and determination he had never encountered in any other species. Meanwhile, in a hidden bunker deep beneath the city, Dr. Shin Hana coordinated a global network of scientists and engineers who were working around the clock to understand Imperial technology. Every captured weapon, every piece of alien equipment was immediately analyzed and reverse-engineered. Pattern recognition confirms our earlier analysis, Dr. Shin announced through encrypted communications. To resistance cells worldwide, Imperial energy weapons have a 30-second recharge cycle after firing at maximum power. Their personal armor has weak points at the joints. Their communication systems operate on predictable frequencies that we can jam using modified civilian radio equipment. Within just 5 days of the initial invasion, Imperial commanders were sending increasingly desperate reports back to Admiral Talon's flagship. The humans were not behaving like any conquered species in Imperial history. Instead of surrendering, they were learning, adapting and improving their tactics faster than Imperial combat computers could analyze and counter. The Empire was discovering that they had not invaded a primitive world populated by frightened creatures. They had invaded a planet full of persistence hunters who had spent millions of years learning how to bring down prey much larger and stronger than themselves. And now, for the first time in their evolutionary history, humans had found prey that was truly worthy of the hunt. Admiral Talon stared at the battle reports streaming across his command screens, his 4 eyes blinking in disbelief. What should have been a simple 3-day conquest had turned into a nightmare that was now entering its 2nd week. His ground forces were requesting reinforcements every few hours, and his casualty reports showed losses that were completely unacceptable for a primitive world conquest. Deploy Battle Groups 7, 12, and 15 to Earth immediately, Admiral Talon ordered his fleet commanders. These humans are more stubborn than expected, but surely 3 additional battle groups will be enough to crush their pathetic resistance once and for all. The additional Imperial ships began arriving in Earth's orbit within days, bringing the total invasion force to over 600 vessels. Each ship bristled with weapons that could level mountains, and together they carried enough firepower to reduce Earth's surface to molten rock. Admiral Talon was confident that this overwhelming display of Imperial might would finally break human morale and force their immediate surrender. But down on Earth's surface, humanity was not cowering in fear. Instead, they were working harder than they had ever worked in their entire history. Commander Oh Seung-min had barely slept in 2 weeks. He operated from a mobile command center that moved constantly to avoid Imperial bombing runs, coordinating teams of engineers and scientists who were scattered across the globe. His newly formed Rapid Engineering Corps had become humanity's most important weapon against the alien invaders. "Status report on Project Fusion," Commander Oh said into his headset, speaking to engineering teams in underground laboratories from Seoul to Stockholm. Engineer Park Minji looked up from a workstation. That looked like something from a science fiction movie. Half of the equipment was human-made computers and electronics, while the other half consisted of salvaged Imperial technology that hummed with alien energy. Her hands moved quickly across control panels that she had learned to operate through. Pure trial and error. "Sir, we have successfully integrated Imperial power cores with our missile guidance systems," she reported excitedly. "The range increase is incredible. Our missiles can now travel 4 times farther than before, and they hit with enough force to penetrate Imperial ship armor." What Admiral Talon and his commanders failed to understand was that they were not fighting against a typical primitive species. Humans had spent thousands of years fighting against other humans, developing tactics and strategies that were born from constant warfare against opponents who were just as intelligent and creative as themselves. Every military academy on Earth had studied the great battles of human history, from ancient sieges to modern tank warfare. Human generals had written entire libraries about flanking maneuvers, supply line disruption, psychological warfare, and asymmetric combat tactics. All of this accumulated knowledge was now being applied against an enemy that had grown lazy from conquering species that surrendered quickly. The Imperial Navy had never faced opponents who fought like humans. Their standard battle tactics assumed that enemy ships would maintain safe distances and engage in orderly long-range combat. They had never encountered pilots crazy enough to use kamikaze attacks or desperate enough to turn their own spacecraft into guided missiles. Major Lim Jae-hyun led a squadron of modified human fighters toward an Imperial frigate that was orbiting above the Pacific Ocean. His pilots were flying in formation patterns that violated every rule of space combat safety, using the gravity of Earth itself as a weapon and hiding their approach behind the glowing debris field that had once been the moon. "Falcon Squadron, this is Control." The radio crackled with static. "Confirm your attack plan. You are requesting permission to ram an Imperial warship?" "Affirmative, Control," Major Lim replied calmly, as if he was discussing the weather instead of a suicide mission. "Imperial ships have strong energy shields but weak physical armor. Their design assumes enemies will maintain safe distances. We are going to get very, very close." The human fighters accelerated to maximum speed, diving toward the Imperial frigate like bullets fired from a gun. At the last possible second, the pilots ejected from their cockpits, while their unmanned ships continued forward, slamming into the alien vessel with the force of meteorites. The Imperial crew had never experienced anything like the violent shaking and spinning that followed the collision. Their species had evolved in low-gravity environments, and the sudden acceleration forces knocked them unconscious instantly. When human rescue teams boarded the captured ship hours later, they found the entire alien crew passed out in their seats. "Control, this is Falcon Leader." Major Lim's voice came through the radio as he floated in his emergency spacesuit, watching human engineers take control of the Imperial vessel. "Package secured. These ships were not designed to fight opponents, crazy enough to ram them. The aliens built their vessels assuming that other species would fight fair. Within weeks, captured Imperial technology was being reverse-engineered in secret laboratories around the world. Human engineers discovered that alien energy weapons were actually less sophisticated than they appeared. They were just powered by more advanced energy sources. Once humans figured out how Imperial power systems worked, they began building hybrid weapons that combined human creativity with alien technology. The Empire was learning a harsh lesson about the difference between technological superiority and tactical superiority. They had better tools, but humans had better ideas about how to use tools as weapons. And in warfare, creativity and determination often matter more than having the biggest guns. Captain Zeth had been flying Imperial bombers for 23 years and had never been shot down before. His atmospheric attack craft was supposed to be invisible to primitive radar systems, but somehow the humans had detected his approach and hit him with a missile that turned his advanced fighter into a falling piece of burning metal. The crash into the Pacific Ocean should have killed him instantly. The impact threw him around inside his cockpit like a toy, and salt water began flooding into his ship through dozens of cracks in the hull. Captain Zeth was certain he was going to die thousands of miles from his homeworld, drowning in an alien ocean, on a planet that was supposed to surrender without a fight. Then he saw a human face looking down at him through the murky water. Sergeant, First Class Bei Yujin, had been part of a coastal defense unit when she saw the Imperial bomber crash offshore. Without hesitation, she dove into the rough ocean waves and swam toward the sinking wreckage, even though approaching a downed enemy aircraft was extremely dangerous. The bomber could have exploded at any moment, and there was no guarantee that the alien pilot inside would not try to kill her the moment she rescued him, but Sergeant Bei pulled Captain Zeth from his flooded cockpit anyway, dragging his unconscious body to shore and immediately beginning emergency medical treatment. When he woke up hours later in a makeshift field hospital, he found himself surrounded by human soldiers who could have executed him as an enemy pilot, but instead were trying to save his life. Over the following days, Captain Zeth witnessed things that completely changed his understanding of warfare and of humanity itself. He had expected to be tortured for military intelligence or simply killed as revenge for the bombing campaigns his squadron had conducted against human cities. Instead, he found himself being treated as a patient rather than a prisoner. What shocked Captain Zeth most was watching Sergeant Bay work without rest for 72 straight hours. She coordinated defensive positions, treated wounded soldiers, and maintained communications with other units, all while staying awake through a combination of caffeine pills, energy drinks, and pure willpower. Captain Zeth's species required at least 12 hours of sleep every day to function properly, but this human woman seemed to run on determination alone. On the third day of his captivity, Imperial reinforcements launched a rescue mission to recover Captain Zeth and other captured pilots. Human positions came under heavy bombardment from Imperial aircraft, and several buildings in the medical compound were hit by energy weapons that turned concrete walls into clouds of superheated dust. Captain Zeth expected Sergeant Bay to abandon him and save herself, but instead she threw her own body over his medical bed, using herself as a human shield while continuing to change his bandages even as Imperial bombs exploded around them. She had no military reason to protect an enemy prisoner, and every reason to let him die so she could escape to safety. "Why are you doing this?" Captain Zeth asked through his universal translator, genuinely confused by her behavior. "I am your enemy. Let me die and save yourself." Sergeant Bay looked up at him while reloading her rifle with one hand and adjusting his IV tube with the other. "Because leaving you to die would make me less human than I want to be," she replied simply. "We do not win this war by becoming the monsters you expected us to be." This response made no sense to Captain Zeth. In every other conquest he had participated in, defeated species became desperate and cruel when facing extinction. They abandoned their wounded, executed prisoners, and fought with savage brutality. That made Imperial occupation easier to justify. But humans seemed to become more compassionate under pressure, not less. Captain Zeth began secretly documenting everything he observed during his captivity. He watched civilian Dr. Nam Tayo treat wounded Imperial soldiers with the same careful attention he gave to injured human civilians. The doctor worked 18-hour shifts in an underground medical facility, performing surgery on alien physiology he had never studied before, simply because he had taken an oath to preserve life, regardless of species. Even more remarkable, Captain Zeth saw human children sharing their food rations with captured Imperial soldiers, even though the city around them was burning from Imperial bombing raids. These children had every reason to hate their alien captors, but instead they offered them water and tried to communicate through gestures and drawings. The most impressive human he met was Captain Choi Yunji, who continued leading her military unit even after losing her left arm to an Imperial energy weapon. She had replaced her missing limb with a mechanical prosthetic cobbled together from salvaged Imperial technology and human engineering. The device was crude and obviously painful to use, but it allowed her to continue fighting. "Do you not understand that this war is hopeless for your species?" Captain Zeth asked her during one of their conversations. "Why do you not simply surrender and save the lives of your people?" Captain Choi laughed, a sound that was both bitter and determined. "Captain, you need to understand something about human evolution. We are persistence hunters. Our ancestors survived by chasing mammoth and giant elk across entire continents until those massive animals collapsed from exhaustion. We did not outrun them or outfight them. We outlasted them." She paused to adjust her mechanical arm, wincing slightly from the pain but never stopping her work. "What makes you think we will stop chasing you just because you have bigger weapons? We have been hunting things stronger than us for 2 million years. You are just the latest mammoth." 6 months had passed since the first Imperial ships appeared in Earth's sky, and everything had changed. What started as humanity's desperate fight for survival had transformed into something the Galactic Empire had never experienced before. They were no longer the hunters. They had become the hunted. Deep in the underground shipyards beneath the Swiss Alps, Chief Designer Ko Minseo stood before the largest engineering project in human history. Dozens of captured Imperial vessels floated in massive underground caverns, being completely rebuilt by teams of human engineers, working around the clock. These ships no longer looked like the elegant Imperial designs that had first terrorized Earth's population. "Strip out everything unnecessary," Komin Seo ordered her engineering teams. "Remove the luxury quarters, the recreational areas, the decorative panels. Replace them with additional fuel tanks, ammunition storage, and backup life support systems." The Imperial ships had been designed for species that valued comfort during long space voyages. They had spacious living quarters, elaborate dining facilities, and even entertainment centers for crew relaxation. Human engineers ripped all of this out and replaced it with practical military equipment that would allow the ships to operate for months without returning to base. "These aliens built their ships like cruise ships," laughed engineer Park Woo-jin, as he welded additional armor plating to a converted Imperial destroyer. "We are turning them into submarines that can stay underwater for as long as necessary to complete the mission." Admiral Wang Do-yun had been promoted from captain to admiral in just 6 months, a promotion that normally would have taken decades in peacetime. He now commanded the newly formed Earth Defense Fleet from the bridge of a massive Imperial dreadnought that had been renamed Persistence, a name that perfectly captured humanity's approach to this war. The bridge of the Persistence looked nothing like its original Imperial design. Human engineers had replaced the comfortable alien furniture with cramped but efficient workstations. The crew operated on 4-hour sleep rotations, staying alert through a combination of caffeine, energy stimulants, and pure determination that would have killed most alien species within days. "Navigator Lee Jisoo, set course for the Proxima Supply Depot," Admiral Wang ordered. "We are going to cut off their supply lines and leave their advanced fleet stranded without fuel or ammunition." This was a completely new type of warfare for the Imperial Navy. In 1,000 years of galactic conquest, no defeated species had ever been capable of launching counterattacks against Imperial territory. The Empire's military doctrine assumed that primitive species would be trapped on their home worlds, fighting desperately for survival until they eventually surrendered or were exterminated. But humans had stolen Imperial ships and were now using them to bring the war directly to Imperial space. Earth's fleet began hitting supply convoys across 3 different star systems, using hit-and-run tactics that left Imperial commanders constantly confused and off-balance. Captain Seo Minjae led Phoenix Squadron, a group of human pilots flying modified Imperial interceptor fighters. These small, fast ships had been designed for alien pilots who could only handle moderate acceleration forces. Human pilots, however, regularly pushed the aircraft far beyond their design specifications, pulling G-forces that would render most alien species unconscious. "So the trick is to ignore what the manual says these ships can do," Captain Seo explained to her squadron during a pre-mission briefing. These fighters were built by engineers who assumed their pilots would want to survive the flight comfortably. "We just want to complete the mission." Her pilots had modified their interceptors with additional engines, stronger structural supports, and life support systems designed to keep humans conscious during extreme acceleration. The result was aircraft that could outmaneuver any Imperial fighter, simply because human pilots were willing to endure physical punishment that would kill alien crews. "Command, this is Phoenix Leader." Captain Seo's voice crackled over the communication system after a successful raid on an Imperial ammunition convoy. "Targets neutralized, all enemy supply ships destroyed, moving to secondary objectives as planned." She paused, checking her instruments while her fighter pulled a turn that would have torn apart a standard Imperial interceptor. "For the record, these ships handle much better when you stop caring about the manufacturer's warranty." Phoenix Squadron out. The Imperial Navy was discovering that they had never faced an enemy like humanity before. Every other species they had conquered fought defensively, trying to protect their homeworlds until they were eventually overwhelmed by superior Imperial firepower. But humans were fighting offensively, taking the war directly to Imperial territory and forcing the Empire to defend supply lines that had been safe for centuries. For the first time in Imperial history, their enemies were not cowering on their home planet, waiting to be destroyed. Instead, human ships were appearing throughout Imperial space, striking targets that were supposed to be completely secure and disappearing before Imperial reinforcements could respond. The Empire was beginning to understand that they had not invaded a primitive world. They had accidentally started a war with a species that had spent millions of years learning how to hunt prey much larger and more powerful than themselves. And now, for the first time in their evolutionary history, humans had found prey that was truly worthy of a galactic-scale hunt. Supreme Admiral Kex sat in his command chamber aboard the massive Imperial flagship Eternal Dominion, staring at battle reports that made no sense according to 3 centuries of military experience. The holographic displays around him showed tactical data that should have been impossible. A primitive species was not only surviving against the full might of the Galactic Empire, but they were actually winning battles across multiple star systems. The Supreme Admiral had personally overseen the conquest of over 200 worlds during his long career. He had seen species surrender after losing a single city, others collapse after their military leaders were captured, and some give up the moment they realized the technological gap between their weapons and Imperial firepower. But nothing in. His experience had prepared him for the reports streaming in from the human conflict. "Sir," his aide reported nervously, approaching the command throne with a datapad that contained the latest intelligence briefings, "we are receiving rebellion reports from 17 different conquered systems across the galaxy. The subjugated species are claiming inspiration from something they call the human example." Supreme Admiral Kex's 4 eyes widened in alarm. This was far worse than a simple military defeat. If news of human resistance was spreading to other conquered worlds, it could destabilize the entire Imperial structure that had maintained galactic peace for over 1,000 years. Commander Yule, the same officer who had originally discovered Earth during that routine reconnaissance mission that now seemed like a lifetime ago, stood nervously before the War Council. His mandibles clicked anxiously as he prepared to deliver a report that would contradict everything the Empire believed about warfare and conquest. "Honored Supreme Admiral," Commander Yule began carefully, "with the greatest respect, I believe we have fundamentally misunderstood this species from the very beginning." "Explain your analysis, Commander," the Supreme Admiral ordered, leaning forward in his throne. "Sir, humans do not fight like any species we have ever encountered in our galactic expansion. Our standard psychological warfare tactics are completely ineffective because they have already accepted death as an acceptable outcome before they even begin fighting. They do not fear extinction, they fear surrender more than they fear dying." Commander Yule activated a holographic display showing human battle tactics that violated every conventional military doctrine in the Imperial database. "Our technological superiority means nothing to them because they adapt our own weapons against us, faster than our engineers can design countermeasures. But most critically, sir, they do not fight for territory or resources or even survival. They fight for abstract concepts like freedom, honor, and dignity that most species abandon when facing overwhelming force." Intelligence Officer Nex stepped forward, her tentacles manipulating multiple data displays simultaneously as she presented her detailed analysis of human military capabilities. "Supreme Admiral, human military doctrine is based on something they call total war, the complete mobilization of their entire species for extended conflict. They have historical records of wars that lasted for decades, with entire generations born and raised during continuous warfare. They have developed tactical innovations that we have never encountered because they spent millennia fighting enemies who were just as creative and determined as themselves, other humans." The intelligence officer's presentation showed battle footage that seemed impossible to believe. Human soldiers fighting for days without sleep, pilots flying suicide missions with no expectation of survival, and civilians voluntarily transforming their cities into battlefields rather than surrender to occupation. They have turned warfare into an art form, sir. Every human military academy studies thousands of years of conflict against opponents who match their intelligence and determination. They have developed strategies for fighting enemies who know their tactics, counter-strategies for opponents who adapt to their strategies, and counter-counter strategies for enemies who learn to anticipate their adaptations. Supreme Admiral Kex felt something he had never experienced in 3 centuries of successful galactic conquest: genuine fear. Not fear of dying in battle, which was an honorable end for any military officer, but fear of facing an enemy that could not be defeated through conventional means. What is your professional recommendation? Intelligence Officer Nex. Immediate withdrawal of all Imperial forces to core worlds, Supreme Admiral. Establish a 50 light-year buffer zone around human space with automated warning beacons. Classify humanity as an extreme threat species and issue galaxy-wide advisories to avoid contact. The War Council chamber fell silent as the implications of this recommendation sank in. The Galactic Empire, which had never retreated from any conflict in its 1,000-year history, was being advised to run away from a species that had not even achieved faster-than-light travel just 1 year ago. Sir, Commander Yule added quietly, there is one more thing you should know. Our psychological analysis indicates that humans become more dangerous when they are cornered and desperate. Right. Now they are fighting to defend their home world. If we continue this war and force them to become a spacefaring military species, they may decide that the best defense is to eliminate the threat permanently. Supreme Admiral Kex understood the implications immediately. The Empire had awakened something that should have been left sleeping. They had turned a planet full of persistence hunters into a species-wide military machine that was now learning to hunt among the stars. For the first time in Imperial history, retreat was not just the smart tactical choice. It might be the only way to ensure the Empire's survival. The massive Imperial fleet that had once numbered over 600 warships was now reduced to fewer than 100 damaged vessels limping toward the edge of Earth's solar system. Admiral Talon stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the blue-green planet that had humbled the mighty Galactic Empire grow smaller in his viewport. His remaining ships were battered, their crews exhausted, and their morale completely shattered. What made the retreat even more humiliating was that Earth Defense Coordinator Kim In-wook had actually allowed them to leave. Human forces now possessed enough captured Imperial technology and reverse-engineered weapons to destroy the fleeing fleet completely, but they had chosen to let the survivors escape. This act of mercy somehow felt more threatening than any display of military might. All ships prepare for hyperspace jump, Admiral Talon ordered through the fleet communication system. Set course for Imperial High Command. Priority Alpha emergency protocols are now in effect. As the Imperial fleet prepared to abandon the Sol system forever, Admiral Talon activated the most important recording device on his ship. What he was about to transmit would change the course of galactic history and force the Empire to confront the reality that they were no longer the apex predators of the galaxy. This is Supreme Admiral Talon of the 47th Subjugation Fleet, he spoke clearly, into the recording device, his voice carrying the weight of complete military defeat. Priority Alpha transmission to all Imperial forces, allied species and galactic command structure. The following message must be disseminated immediately across all Imperial territories. Admiral Talon paused, gathering his thoughts as he prepared to deliver news that would shock the entire galactic community. We have encountered a species designated human in the Sol system of the Outer Spiral Arm. Our initial assessment of primitive technological capability was catastrophically incorrect. These beings possess tactical adaptability that exceeds our strategic modeling capacity by several orders of magnitude. The Admiral looked out at the debris field that had once been Earth's moon, now transformed into a glowing asteroid belt that human engineers were already harvesting for raw materials to build more weapons. Critical intelligence update. Humans do not fight for territory, resources, or even species survival, as we understand these concepts. Instead, they engage in warfare to preserve abstract ideals, including freedom, dignity, and honor. These concepts appear to be more important to them than continued existence. Admiral Talon activated holographic displays showing battle footage that still seemed impossible to believe, even after witnessing it firsthand. Standard Imperial psychological warfare protocols are completely ineffective against this species. Threats of extinction do not produce surrender. They produce increased resistance. Most disturbing, humans appear to become more dangerous and creative when facing hopeless odds rather than less dangerous. The recording continued as Admiral Talon documented the technological nightmare that humanity had become in just months of warfare. Human engineering capabilities exceed all previous assessments. They have successfully reverse-engineered our most advanced technology and improved upon our designs within months of first contact. Their modifications to Imperial equipment demonstrate understanding of our systems that our own engineers required decades to achieve. Admiral Talon's voice became grimmer as he delivered the most important part of his warning. Most critically for all Imperial forces, humans fight as if death is preferable to surrender or subjugation. This mentality makes their tactical decisions completely unpredictable to our strategic algorithms. They regularly employ tactics that should result in total casualties, but somehow achieve military objectives through sheer determination and willingness to accept losses. The Admiral paused the recording to check his fleet's status. The hyperspace engines were nearly ready, and soon they would be jumping away from this nightmare forever. Imperial Command Directive, based on field experience, establish immediate no-contact protocols around human space. Any future engagement with human forces should be considered a potential species-ending conflict. Do not underestimate their technological capabilities. Do not assume their tactics will follow logical patterns. Do not attempt conquest, negotiation, or even observation missions. Admiral Talon's final words were delivered with the weight of absolute certainty born from bitter experience. Before our departure, humans delivered one final message through their military representative, Colonel Hongjina. The message was brief but unmistakable. Next time, we will be ready from the start. Intelligence analysis suggests this was not a threat, but a simple statement of fact. As the Imperial fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, Admiral Talon added one last warning that would echo throughout the galaxy for generations to come. To all species receiving this transmission, humanity has demonstrated that technological superiority does not guarantee military victory when facing opponents who refuse to be defeated. They have proven that some species will choose extinction over surrender. Do not make the mistake we made. Do not assume that primitive technology means primitive thinking, and above all, do not corner them unless you are prepared for a fight. That will change both species forever. The Imperial fleet vanished into hyperspace, carrying the most important warning in galactic history. President Park Min-sik stood at the window of the rebuilt Seoul Command Center, watching the final Imperial ships vanish into points of light as they jumped to hyperspace. The war that had begun with humanity's moon being destroyed was finally over, but what came next would determine whether Earth became a beacon of hope for the galaxy or just another empire built on conquest and fear. The command center bustled with activity as military officers, scientists, and political leaders debated humanity's next move. They now possessed captured Imperial technology that could make them the most powerful military force in the galaxy. They had proven that human tactics and determination could defeat enemies with superior weapons. The question was what to do with this newfound power. General An Tai-hyung slammed his fist on the conference table, his face flushed with the excitement of victory. Mr. President, we have their technology now. We understand how their ships work, how their weapons function, and most importantly, we know where their homeworlds are located. We could end their empire completely and free every species they have enslaved over the past 1,000 years. The general activated a holographic star map showing Imperial territory spread across dozens of star systems. Look at this, sir. Hundreds of worlds, billions of enslaved beings all waiting for liberation. We have the power to give them freedom and ensure that the Empire can never threaten anyone again. But Dr. Shin Hana, who had coordinated humanity's scientific resistance throughout the war, strongly disagreed with the general's aggressive approach. She stood up from her chair, her voice calm but determined. If we become conquerors ourselves, we become exactly what we fought against, she argued. Our strength during this war was not superior firepower or better technology. Our strength was our principles, the fact that we fought for freedom and dignity rather than domination and control. Dr. Shin pulled up footage from the recent battles, showing human soldiers risking their lives to save Imperial prisoners and civilians helping wounded alien soldiers. The moment we start invading other worlds, even with good intentions, we stop being the defenders of freedom and become just another empire imposing our will on others. Admiral Lee Minho, who had been promoted from captain after leading several successful space battles, proposed a third option that balanced both military strength and moral principles. "Mr. President, I suggest we take a middle path. We defend our space and the space of any species that asks for our protection, but we also reach out to show the galaxy that there is an alternative to imperial rule. We become an example rather than conquerors." The Admiral's proposal gained support from many in the room who had grown tired of warfare and wanted to focus on building rather than destroying. Over the following months, footage began spreading across the galaxy through captured Imperial communication networks. But these videos did not show human weapons or military victories. Instead, they showed something the galaxy had never seen before: a powerful species that chose mercy over revenge. Dr. Cho Young-soo was filmed treating wounded Imperial prisoners with the same care he gave to human patients, working 18-hour shifts to save the lives of soldiers who had bombed his city just weeks earlier. Engineer Kim Haeun was recorded rebuilding destroyed alien ships alongside their former crews, teaching them how human modifications could make their vessels more efficient and reliable. Most powerful of all was footage of Commander Yoon Seo-hyun working with former Imperial slaves, teaching them how to repair and operate their own spacecraft so they could return to their homeworlds as free beings rather than refugees. Within 1 year of the Imperial retreat, 17 different species had declared independence from the Empire. Each of these rebellious worlds received visits from human technical advisors who helped establish defensive systems and shared captured Imperial technology freely. The humans asked for nothing in return, except that these newly free species treat their own people with dignity and respect. The Imperial Navy, terrified of another conflict with humanity, established a 50-light-year exclusion zone around human space. On automated boundary markers placed at every entry point, a simple message appeared in every known galactic language: humanity, approach with peaceful intentions, or do not approach at all. We do not seek conquest or expansion, but we will not accept subjugation or oppression. We offer friendship to those who come in peace, and we offer resistance to those who come with hostile intent. Choose your approach wisely. The galaxy slowly learned that some species fight not to conquer others, but simply to remain free themselves. Humanity had proven that freedom and dignity were worth any price, even when facing impossible odds against technologically superior. Enemies.news of the human example spread to worlds throughout the galaxy, inspiring enslaved species to dream of independence and causing Imperial governors to worry about rebellion in their own territories. The Galactic Empire, which had ruled through fear and overwhelming force for 1,000 years, suddenly found itself facing an enemy it could not defeat: the simple idea that all intelligent beings deserve to be free. And in the depths of space, human ships patrolled the borders of free worlds, carrying a message that would echo throughout the galaxy for generations to come. Some things are worth fighting for, and freedom is the most precious of them all.